Mushrooms plus DMT, a magical combination. This is my account of taking a dose of DMT while peaking on a shroom trip. First, I wanted to lay out my experiences with both DMT and shrooms. I recently acquired around a gram of DMT and had been enjoying the trips I had experienced. I had used DMT about 5 times prior to this experience. All of these trips consisted of intense visuals, and a general euphoria of the mind and body. I had not really felt the spiritual side of DMT that I have read about. I have also tripped shrooms 4 times prior and had some wonderful trips, most notably when I did 5 grams. Anyways, onto the report. It was Friday when I got a call from my most trusted psychedelic companion, my brother, that he had gotten shrooms for us to do. I hadn't planned on going home from school, but my plans quickly changed once I had this news. We planned to trip Saturday night at another friend's house that was out in the woods. I had in the back of my head an idea that I wanted to try DMT on shrooms. Saturday I spent the day outside kayaking, and had an amazing day. Driving home from kayaking, the anticipation of doing shrooms was building. It had been a while since I had last done them, and man, was I excited. I got home, ate a little dinner, smoked some weed, and my brother and I left for our friend's house. We arrived at about 8:30 p.m. and I informed them of my plan to smoke DMT at the peak of my shroom trip. They thought it was a great idea, and at 9 p.m. we all ate 1/8 of an ounce of shrooms. Immediately after eating the shrooms, I prepared a pipe with a dosage of DMT. I'm not entirely sure of the dosage because I did not have powder scales with me and just eyeballed what I put in. My guess is I put in about 60 to 80 milligrams of DMT in a pipe with a small amount of weed. At about 9:30 p.m. my brother, who I will refer to as B, and other friend, who I will refer to as L, both began to feel the effects of the shrooms. I didn't feel them coming on yet, so we smoked some weed and I enjoyed watching them experience the onset. At about 10 p.m. the mushrooms began to creep up. The body tingling I typically feel on mushrooms began, and I knew they were setting in when painting on the walls and plants began to wave and bend slightly. By 10:30 p.m. my visuals were getting more and more intense. Colors were shifting, and things were bending and twisting much more. There was also an emotional high I felt, that I couldn't remember being so profound this early into any of my other shroom trips. At about 11 p.m. I decided I wanted to walk outside and see what it was like. It was a beautiful night, completely clear, and we were far enough out in the woods that there was very little light pollution. I looked up at the stars for about 10 minutes, just staring in awe at the tiny dots of light and watching them shift colors and sparkle and move around in my mind's eye. It was a truly beautiful thing to see. Then suddenly I hear an extremely loud screeching sounds coming up the valley we were in. I had no idea what it was, but it completely overwhelmed by hearing. I saw lights coming out of the woods, and it appeared as though a train was coming up the valley. My mind was scrambling for an explanation. Did I just hallucinate an entire train? I quickly ran back inside, not able to handle the overwhelming sound that the train was producing. I asked Al if there were railroad tracks across the valley, and he said yes. I was relieved that what I had just seen was real, and that the mushrooms weren't making me go completely crazy yet. It was about 11:30 p.m. now, and the mushroom trip had fully set in. My visuals had become much more intense as plants in the room began to twist and seem to curl around themselves. A painting Al had done was hanging on the wall, and as I started to examine it, the painting seemed to sigh and shift colors. It was very interesting, and I watched it for about 10 minutes. About this time I went and got the DMT pipe, so that I had it ready when I wanted. About 12 midnight, I felt like I was peaking on the shrooms. The visuals had become the most intense they had been all night, and I had reached a point where a feeling of oneness and unity had taken hold. I held the DMT pipe in my hands for about 10 minutes, contemplating what I was about to do and preparing my mind and body for it as best I could. Suddenly my mind and body told me the time was right, and with no warning I took 4 very large hits from the pipe. The taste of DMT overwhelmed my mouth, and made it very difficult to take the last 2 hits. After taking the last hit, I set the pipe down, and within 5 seconds my vision exploded. I literally do not know how else to describe it. I wasn't even looking at anything particularly interesting, but nonetheless colors and extremely complex geometric shapes and lines burst into being right in front of me. They grew and shrank and shifted from one shape to another, from one color to another. All of the colors were extremely bright, and seemed to have a light source of their own. Very quickly my vision was drawn to L's fish tank. The fish inside had patterns on their scales that changed every few seconds, and as they swam around I watched their colors change from silver, to orange, to purple and any other color you can imagine. I then became affixed on a plant growing in the fish tank called Java moss. If you don't know what it looks like, Google it. This plant began to seethe and roll and twist around itself. There was a dark spot in the center that it all revolved around. This was within 5 minutes of smoking the DMT. I watched this plant for a few minutes and it continued to roll and twist around at varying speeds. I suddenly became aware of a peculiar and unique energy that I still cannot explain. This energy came up and embraced me as I watched the Java moss. As I watched the moss, I began to realize that this energy I felt was not something internal, but actually was present in the moss. Even the fish seemed to be a part of it. It was truly incredible, and at this moment my ego was completely shattered. I will never forget this feeling and the complete loss of self that occurred. All I could do was sit back and watch as the fish swam around and the moss seethed, both of them connected to this same energy that I was connected to. I tried to explain to El what I was seeing and how wonderful it all was. He immediately asked if I wanted to touch the moss. I was taken back a little, as I had not thought of this. Immediately I wanted to. I literally could not resist. I had to touch the moss. As I approached the moss, it seemed to slow down and become much more still, almost as if it sensed what I was about to do. I stared at the moss, wanting to make sure that it was okay for me to touch it. I don't know what told me, but something in my mind told me it was okay, and I placed my hands in the tank and on the moss. I was hesitant at first, as I wasn't sure how the moss would feel or react to me. The moss was incredible to the touch. It was extremely soft, and it seemed to float around my hands and lightly touch my skin. Everywhere it touched I could feel acutely, as if the energy I was connected to was linking with the plant. I felt a sudden urge to grab the moss and feel it in my hands. As soon as I did this, an extreme rush of emotion came over me. It was as if I was linked to the plant, and the fish in the tank, and not just the tank, but as if I was linked to this great energy that was present everywhere. I stared at the Java moss as I held it in my hands, and what I saw and felt is very difficult for me to describe. It was as if I could see this energy flowing between the plant, between the water, between the entire universe, and me. As I stared at the moss, it began to seethe and roll, slowly but getting faster and faster. Suddenly the energy began to guide my thoughts, and I began thinking very heavily about life, and where I was going and all the things that I had been going through lately. This energy seemed to come in and help me answer many of the questions that I had been trying to answer. It was almost as if the universe was telling me not to worry, that this energy that I was sensing is there, and always will be, to keep things in balance. I have no other way to describe what I saw and felt at this moment other than absolute and complete serenity. I do not think I have ever been as happy in my life than at this moment. This feeling completely washed over me, and I finally let go of the Java moss. The connection I had felt to the energy around me began to fade, but I could still sense it around me, and whenever I watched the fish, it was immediately clear. I felt like I had been tripping on DMT for hours, but when I was finally able to look at the clock, it was only 12:40 a.m. As the DMT wore off, I could still tell I was tripping on mushrooms, but the visuals were almost completely gone. I spent the next hour and a half just staring at the fish tank and watching the fish and Java moss and thinking about what I had just experienced and my life as a whole. I had thought that I have had some incredible experiences on psychedelics, but this was 1,000 times better than anything. This extreme sense of serenity, peacefulness, and oneness persisted for the entire night, and throughout the whole next day. Typically I am not one to believe in what some people may call the spirit world, and I'm not sure that I do even know. But this experience was truly mind-altering. It was not something I ever expected beforehand, and I don't know if I will ever experience another trip like this one. There really is no way for me to explain what I saw and felt, but my mind has been expanded in a way that I will never forget. My mind is still reeling from it all, and I am still struggling to make sense of it. But the more I think about, the more I feel that this was an opening into the energies of the universe. This has been my one and only experience that I am confident in saying was A+4 by the Shulgin scale. May we all live happy, free, and with our minds wide open.